My mother's text came through at 6:47 p.m., exactly 13 minutes before I was supposed to make my entrance. Stay in the kitchen. The old money guests don't want to see a failure like you. I read it twice. Not because I was surprised. I read it twice because I wanted to remember exactly how it felt. The way the words looked on the screen, the casual cruelty of that period at the end like she was stating a fact about the weather. I smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was perfect. She had just handed me the last piece of evidence I would ever need. I took a screenshot, saved it to a folder I had been building for 14 years, a folder filled with text messages and voicemails and memories that cut like glass. This was the final piece, the one that would tie everything together. Then I typed my reply with steady fingers. Fine, good luck. I hit send and checked the time again. 12 minutes now. 12 minutes until Charles Whitmore would step up to that microphone in the ballroom and introduce the anonymous investor who had saved Ashford Holdings from bankruptcy. 12 minutes until my mother would finally meet the billionaire she had been desperate to impress all evening. She had no idea she had already tried to lock that billionaire in the kitchen. I slipped my phone into my clutch and felt the edges of the photograph I had carried with me for over 2 decades, the only proof that I had ever existed in this house, the only picture my mother could not destroy because I had taken it with me the night I left. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back 30 minutes. I arrived at the Ashford estate at 6:17 p.m. in a rental car that cost $40 a day. Not because I could not afford better. I own 3 cars now. One of them is a Bentley Continental that I bought with cash on the day my company went public. But tonight, I needed to be underestimated one last time. The estate looked exactly as I remembered it. 12,000 square feet of Connecticut old money perched on a hill overlooking Long Island Sound. The kind of house that whispered generational wealth from every perfectly manicured hedge and every imported Italian stone in the driveway. I pulled around to the back past the circular fountain, past the rose garden my mother had installed to impress the neighbors, past all the beautiful things that had been purchased to hide ugly truths. The service entrance looked exactly the same as it had 14 years ago. Same gray paint on the door, same motion sensor light that flickered when you walked too close. Same feeling of shame that crept up my spine as I stepped through it. A young woman in catering uniform looked up from her clipboard. She could not have been older than 22, probably a college student making extra money during the holidays. She had no idea what this house really was. The kitchen entrance is this way, miss. I know, I said. I used to live here. She blinked, checked her list, found nothing. I'm sorry I was not told about any family members arriving through the service entrance. You were not told about me at all, I said. Do not worry, nobody ever is. I walked past her before she could ask more questions. My heels clicked against the tile floor, each step taking me deeper into the house I had spent 8 years trying to forget and 14 years preparing to reclaim. I was 10 years old the first time I ate dinner in this kitchen. My mother had married Richard Ashford III 6 months earlier, and the Ashfords were hosting their first big holiday party. I remember being excited. I had picked out a new dress, dark blue with small white flowers. I had practiced saying "pleased to meet you" in the mirror for an hour. I had imagined all the interesting people I would meet, all the conversations I would have, all the ways I would make my mother proud. But when the guests started arriving, my mother pulled me aside. You will eat in the kitchen tonight, she said. Her grip on my arm was tight enough to leave marks. I can still feel those fingers sometimes when I close my eyes. But I want to meet everyone. You said I could. I said you could come to the party. I did not say you could be seen. I did not understand. Why not? My mother's face did something complicated, something between anger and shame, like I had asked her to explain a secret she had been keeping her whole life. Because these people are old money, Megan. They come from families that have had wealth for generations. Their great-great-grandparents built the railroads and the banks and the companies that run this country. And you? She gestured at me like I was a stain on her dress. You remind them of where I came from. You remind them that I was not always Patricia Ashford. But I am your daughter. Exactly. She said the word like it was a diagnosis, like it was a disease she had been trying to cure. You are my past, and tonight I need to be their future. She led me to the kitchen and sat me at the counter with a plate of food, roast beef and mashed potatoes and green beans, the same food everyone else was eating in the dining room. But mine came on a paper plate, not the good china. Through the swinging door I could hear laughter and clinking glasses. I could hear my mother's voice, high and bright and fake, saying things like, "Oh, how wonderful," and "You simply must tell me more." I could hear the sound of a woman pretending to be someone she was not. I sat there for 3 hours. The kitchen staff moved around me like I was furniture. They did not make eye contact. They did not ask questions. They had been trained to ignore the things the Ashfords wanted ignored. A woman named Maria snuck me a cookie when no one was watching. She pressed it into my palm and whispered, "Lo siento, niña," with eyes that held more kindness than anyone else in that house had ever shown me. I did not cry. I learned that night that crying did not change anything in this house. Tears were just another weakness my mother could use against me. But I did learn 3 things that would shape the rest of my life. First, I did not belong here. Second, my mother was ashamed of me. Third, someday I would make her feel exactly the way she made me feel. I was 10 years old when I made that promise to myself. I am 32 now. Tonight I keep that promise. I walked through the main hallway of the Ashford estate, past the sitting rooms with their antique furniture, past the library with its leather-bound books that nobody ever read, toward the kitchen, where I had been banished so many times. But I stopped when I reached the family photo wall. This was the heart of the Ashford mythology, the visual story they told the world about who they were. 24 photographs in matching silver frames arranged with the precision of a museum exhibit. I counted them. 23 photographs. 23 carefully curated moments of Ashford family happiness. Richard and Patricia's wedding in 2003, all white roses and champagne toasts. Victoria's high school graduation, her blonde hair gleaming under the June sun. Victoria's debutante ball, her dress worth more than most people's cars. Victoria's engagement party last spring, my stepsister glowing with the confidence of a woman who had never doubted her place in the world. Christmas photos from every single year. The family posed in front of the same fireplace in matching outfits. Red sweaters, green sweaters. One year, inexplicably, all in white. I studied each photograph carefully. Richard stood stiff and formal in most of them, like a man who had forgotten how to relax. Patricia smiled, her practiced smile, the one she had perfected for cameras and cocktail parties. The smile that said, "Look how happy we are," while saying nothing about how anyone actually felt. Victoria appeared in nearly every frame, her presence as natural and expected as the furniture. She was the golden child, the real daughter, the one who belonged. I was in none of them, not one. I lived in this house for 8 years, 8 Christmases, 8 Thanksgivings, 8 birthdays where I blew out candles alone in my room while the family celebrated downstairs, 8 years of report cards that no one looked at, and school plays that no one attended, and achievements that no one acknowledged. And in 23 photographs spanning over 2 decades, I did not appear even once. Not because I was never around when photos were taken. I remember standing just outside the frame while the photographer adjusted the lighting. I remember my mother's hand on my shoulder steering me away. I remember her voice, sweet as poison, saying, "Megan, sweetie, why don't you go check on the appetizers?" Right before the camera clicked. She did not just ignore me, she erased me, methodically, deliberately, like she was photoshopping me out of existence. There used to be one photograph with me in it. I remember exactly where it hung, 3rd row, 2nd from the left, right next to the picture of Victoria's first horseback riding competition. It was my grandmother's birthday party in 2004. Grandma Miller, my mother's mother, had insisted I be in the picture. She had put her arm around me and squeezed me tight and said, "This is my granddaughter, and she belongs in this family whether anyone likes it or not." My grandmother died 3 months later, heart attack. Quick and sudden and devastating in a way that nothing else in my life has ever been. The photograph disappeared a week after her funeral. My mother replaced it with a landscape painting of the Connecticut coastline. Waves and rocks and seagulls. Pretty and meaningless and completely devoid of any evidence that I had ever stood in that spot, smiling with my grandmother's arm around me. But I had made a copy. The night before my grandmother's funeral, I had snuck into my mother's office and used the scanner. I was 11 years old, and I could barely reach the buttons. But I made a copy of that photograph, and I hid it in my backpack, and I carried it with me every single day for the next 7 years until I left this house and never looked back. I touched my clutch now, feeling the edge of that photograph through the leather. My proof, my evidence, my reminder that I existed even when everyone else pretended I did not. I turned away from the wall and continued toward the kitchen. My mother found me there 10 minutes later. I was standing by the counter, the same counter where I had eaten alone as a child, when I heard her heels clicking across the tile. She entered the kitchen like she owned the place, which technically she believed she did. "You actually came." Her voice was flat, disappointed. "You invited me. I sent a courtesy invitation." She crossed her arms over her chest. "I did not think you would actually show your face, not after everything." "After everything," I repeated. "You mean after you stopped returning my calls? After you told people I was troubled and unstable? After you pretended I did not exist for 14 years? Do not start with me, Megan. Not tonight." She rubbed her temples like I was giving her a headache just by existing. "I do not have time for your drama." I said nothing. I let her circle me, her eyes scanning my appearance with the same critical gaze I remembered from childhood. The gaze that always found something wrong. I was wearing a simple coat over my dress. Nothing visible but plain black fabric. "What is that you are wearing?" She wrinkled her nose. "Goodness, Megan, you look like the help." "Sorry to disappoint." "You always are." She sighed dramatically, her hand pressed to her chest like she was suffering. "Look, tonight is important. Charles Whitmore is introducing our new investor, the one who saved the company. Everyone who matters is here. The Thorntons, the Prescotts, the Vandenbergs. Do you understand? These are the families I have spent 20 years cultivating relationships with." "Everyone who matters," I repeated. "Do not be dramatic, you know what I mean." "I do," I said quietly. "I have always known exactly what you mean." Something flickered across her face. Irritation, maybe, or the vague discomfort she always showed when I failed to play my role properly. "Just stay here," she said. "Stay in the kitchen. The guests do not need to see you. They do not need to know about—" She waved her hand at me vaguely like I was an unpleasant smell she was trying to disperse. "This. About your daughter." Her jaw tightened. Her eyes went cold. "About my past." She left before I could respond. The kitchen door swung shut behind her and I was alone again. Same kitchen, same counter, same dismissal. But this time I was not a 10-year-old girl with no power and no options. This time I was worth $3.2 billion. This time I owned 51% of her husband's company. This time I was about to walk into that ballroom and watch her entire world collapse. I checked my phone. 7 minutes. The door opened again. I expected my mother returning with another insult, another reminder of my place. But it was Richard who walked in. My stepfather stopped when he saw me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Richard Ashford III looked older than I remembered. His hair had gone fully gray since I left, and there were deep lines around his eyes that had not been there before. He moved more slowly now, more carefully, like a man who had learned to be cautious. He was wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than most people made in a month, but he wore it uncomfortably like a costume he had never learned to love. "Megan." His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "You are here." "Richard." He took a few steps closer, then stopped like he was afraid to come too near. Like I might shatter if he got too close. Or maybe like he might. "You look, well, life has been good to you. I survived." He flinched at the word, looked down at his shoes, his hands opened and closed at his sides, searching for something to hold on to. He started, then stopped. Started again. "I tried to—" He shook his head. "Never mind. It does not matter now." "You tried to what?" He did not answer. His hand reached toward me, trembling slightly, then dropped back to his side. He looked like a man carrying a weight he did not know how to put down. A man with secrets he had kept for too long. "Richard," my mother's voice echoed from the hallway, sharp and demanding. "They need you for photos." He looked at me one last time. His eyes were wet. I had never seen Richard Ashford cry before. I had never seen him show any emotion at all. "I am glad you came," he said softly. "Really, whatever happens tonight, I am glad you came." Then he was gone. I stood there for a moment processing. Richard had looked at me the way people look at gravestones, like I was someone he had failed, like I was a ghost of his mistakes. For 14 years, I had put him in the same box as my mother. Same house, same silence, same guilt. I had built my entire plan around the assumption that everyone in this family was my enemy, that I was alone against all of them. But that look in his eyes, that was not indifference. That was not cruelty, that was regret. I pushed the thought away. I did not have time for complexity. Not now. Not when I was so close. I had a plan, and I was going to see it through. My phone buzzed, the text from my mother, the one I had been waiting for all night. Stay in the kitchen. The old money guests don't want to see a failure like you. I took the screenshot, sent my reply. Then I put my phone away, and I removed my coat. Underneath was not cheap fabric. It was Valentino, custom couture, hand-stitched by artisans in Rome over the course of 3 months, worth more than everything my mother was wearing combined. The dress was deep emerald green, fitted perfectly to my body, like it had been made for this exact moment. Because it had been. I had commissioned this dress specifically for tonight. The color of money, the color of envy, the color of everything my mother had spent her whole life chasing. The kind of dress that made people stop talking when you entered a room. The kind of dress that announced without a single word that you belonged at the center of attention. I opened my clutch and removed my grandmother's brooch, a ruby surrounded by small diamonds set in antique gold. It had been in our family for 4 generations before my mother threw it in the trash the week after Grandma died. I had fished it out at 3 a.m, my fingers digging through coffee grounds and old newspapers. I had hidden it in my backpack, next to the photograph. 2 pieces of evidence that my grandmother had loved me even when no one else did. I pinned the brooch to my dress right over my heart, where it belonged. From the ballroom, I heard Charles Whitmore's voice through the speaker system. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us at the Ashford Foundation's year-end gala. I applied my lipstick. Calm, precise. The same shade of red I had worn to my company's IPO 3 years ago, the day I became a billionaire. Tonight, we have a very special announcement. As you know, Ashford Holdings faced challenging times this year. The market downturn, the failed expansion, the losses that threatened everything this family has built. I took out the old photograph, looked at it one last time. 11-year-old me smiling next to my grandmother, standing in front of the fireplace, in the very room where my mother was now waiting. 2 people who loved each other, 2 people my mother had tried to erase. I put the photograph back in my clutch. I would need it later. But we were saved. Saved by an anonymous investor who believed in our legacy. Someone who saw the potential in this family and chose to invest not just their money, but their faith in our future. I walked toward the ballroom door. Each step was deliberate. Each step was 14 years in the making. Tonight, we finally reveal the identity of this visionary, the person who now owns 51% of Ashford Holdings, the person who controls the future of everything the Ashford family has built. My hand closed around the door handle, cold metal against warm skin. Please welcome our guest of honor. I heard my mother laugh somewhere in the crowd, her fake tinkling old money laugh. The one she had practiced for 20 years. The one she used when she wanted to impress people who would never truly accept her. She smoothed her dress, she checked her hair, she prepared to meet the billionaire who held her future in their hands. She had no idea she had already tried to lock that billionaire in the kitchen. I opened the door and stepped into the light. The light hit me like a wave. 200 faces turned in my direction. Crystal chandeliers scattered rainbows across the marble floor. Champagne towers glittered like monuments to wealth. The string quartet had stopped playing mid-note, their bows frozen in the air. And in the center of it all, my mother stood, frozen, her practiced smile dying on her lips. Charles Whitmore's voice echoed from the podium. Our guest of honor. But the words faded into background noise. All I could see was my mother's face. She was wearing a gown that probably cost more than most people's cars. Pale blue silk that caught the light with every movement. Diamonds at her throat and her ears on her wrists. Her hair swept up in an elegant twist that had probably taken a professional 2 hours to perfect. She looked every inch the old money wife she had spent 20 years pretending to be. And she was staring at me like she had seen a ghost. The crowd parted as I walked down the center aisle. My heels clicked against the marble, each step echoing in the sudden silence. Whispers rippled through the room like wind through tall grass. Who is she? Is that the investor? She looks familiar somehow. That dress is Valentino, I am certain of it. I kept my eyes fixed on my mother. With every step, I watched her expression cycle through confusion, then recognition, then horror, then fury. The champagne glass in her hand was trembling. She mouthed something at me. I could not hear the words, but I knew what she was saying. "What are you doing here?" I did not answer. I just kept walking. Charles Whitmore had stopped speaking. An aide was whispering urgently in his ear, showing him something on a tablet. I watched his face change as he read whatever was on the screen. His eyes widened. He looked at me, then back at the tablet, then at me again. He cleared his throat and leaned into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice wavered slightly, "I present to you the founder and CEO of Sterling Algorithms, the anonymous investor who now controls 51% of Ashford Holdings." He paused, and I could hear the disbelief in his voice. "Miss Megan Miller." The room went completely silent. Then my mother's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the stillness. Everyone turned to look at her. Patricia Ashford, the perfect hostess, the woman who had never made a social error in 20 years, standing in a puddle of champagne with glass fragments glittering around her designer heels. Her face was white. Her hands were shaking. Victoria, standing near the bar, had gone equally pale. My stepsister looked like she was about to be sick. And Richard had closed his eyes. He stood near the back of the room, his head bowed like a man who had known this moment was coming and had finally stopped running from it. I climbed the 3 steps to the stage and took my place behind the podium. The microphone was cold under my fingers. I looked out at the sea of faces. The Thorntons, who had been at every Ashford party for as long as I could remember. The Prescotts, whose daughter had been my mother's closest friend. The Vandenbergs, whose approval my mother had chased for 2 decades. All of them staring at me like I had risen from the dead. "Good evening," I said. My voice was steady, calm. The voice of a woman who had been preparing for this moment for 14 years. "Some of you may not know me." My mother made sure of that. Gasps, murmurs, the crowd stirred like a hive, sensing danger. "Thank you, Charles," I continued. "Though I should mention something. This is not the first time I have been in this house. It is just the first time I have been allowed in the ballroom." More whispers, confused glances exchanged between guests who had no idea what I was talking about. But my mother knew. Her face had gone from white to gray. She pushed through the crowd toward me, shoving past a waiter carrying a tray of canapes, nearly knocking over an elderly woman in pearls. Her composure was gone. The mask was slipping. "What do you think you are doing?" She grabbed my arm the moment I stepped down from the stage. Her grip was exactly as I remembered it from childhood. Tight enough to leave marks. Tight enough to hurt. "This is some kind of trick. You cannot possibly own 51% of your husband's company." I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back up at her face. I did not pull away. I did not flinch. I just met her eyes and watched her realize that she could not intimidate me anymore. "I assure you, Mother, I can and I do. Would you like me to show you the paperwork? It is quite extensive." "You were nothing." Her voice rose louder than she intended. Heads turned all around us. "You are nothing. You worked at a coffee shop when you left here. You lived in a studio apartment the size of my closet. You could barely afford groceries." "I did," I said calmly. "For 2 years, while I was putting myself through college on scholarships and student loans and sheer determination. Then I started a company, built it from the ground up, took it public 3 years ago." I tilted my head slightly. "You would have known all of this, Mother, if you had ever returned even one of my calls." Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. She looked like a fish drowning in air, gasping for something that was no longer there. I could see the other guests watching us with barely concealed fascination. The Thorntons were whispering behind their hands, their eyes bright with the kind of excitement that only comes from witnessing someone else's downfall. Mrs. Vandenberg had her phone out, probably already texting the news to everyone who was not here tonight. This was exactly the kind of drama that old money pretended to despise, but secretly lived for. My mother must have noticed too, because she suddenly changed tactics. Her face smoothed into something resembling maternal warmth. She placed her hand over her heart in a gesture of false sincerity. "Of course, I always knew Megan would do well," she announced to the room, her voice bright and performative. "I am so proud of everything she has accomplished." The lie was so blatant, so utterly transparent, that I almost laughed. "Are you?" I reached into my clutch. "Let me show you something." Before I could pull out my phone, a hand touched my elbow. "Richard." My stepfather looked older than he had in the kitchen. His face was gray, his shoulders slumped under the weight of his tuxedo. He did not look like a man defending his territory. He did not look like a man preparing to fight. He looked like a man who had finally run out of places to hide. "Megan," his voice was quiet, meant only for me. "Can I speak with you privately before you do whatever you are planning to do?" I hesitated. This was not in the plan. The plan was public humiliation. The plan was to read the text message in front of everyone. The plan was 14 years in the making and did not include private conversations with the man who had watched me suffer in silence. "Please." His eyes were wet, threatening to spill over. 5 minutes. There is something you need to know." My mother stepped forward, her face twisted with alarm. "Richard, do not you dare." "Patricia." His voice cracked like a whip. Sharp, commanding, completely unlike anything I had ever heard from him. "Enough." I stared at him. In 8 years of living in this house, I had never once heard Richard Ashford stand up to my mother. He had always been the silent partner, the man who looked away when things got ugly, the coward who let her run the show while he retreated to his study with his whiskey and his regrets. But something had changed. Something in his posture, in his voice, in the way he held my gaze without flinching. Something had finally broken inside him. Against my better judgment, I nodded. Richard led me through a side door away from the ballroom, down a hallway lined with oil paintings of Ashford ancestors who had been dead for a century. His assistant, a woman named Margaret Bashars, vaguely remembered from my childhood, followed behind us, carrying a manila folder. Richard's study was exactly as I remembered it. Dark wood paneling that absorbed all the light, leather chairs that smelled like old cigars, shelves lined with books that looked like they had never been opened. The room had always felt more like a mausoleum than an office, a place to hide from the living. Margaret handed me the folder without a word, then left, closing the heavy oak door behind her. "Open it," Richard said. I did. The first document was a trust agreement, $2 million established in 2012. Beneficiary, Megan Miller. My name, my social security number, everything in order. The second document was a letter from the trust administrator. The fund had been rejected by the beneficiary and returned to the grantor. The third document was the rejection form, with my signature at the bottom, except it was not my signature. I knew my own handwriting. I had been signing my name for 32 years. And this signature, while close, was wrong. The loop on the M was too small. The final R trailed off in the wrong direction. The pressure was inconsistent, heavier in some places, lighter in others. Someone had studied my signature carefully and done their best to copy it. Someone had forged my name. I flipped to the next pages with trembling fingers. Letters, dozens of them, addressed to apartments I had lived in during those hard years after I left home. Each one marked "Return to Sender" in red ink. But I had never received them. I had never sent them back. I had never even known they existed. The final documents were bank records, transactions showing payments from the trust account to a law firm I recognized immediately, the same law firm my mother used for everything, the same lawyers who had handled the prenuptial agreement, the same lawyers who had threatened me with legal action when I tried to claim anything from my grandmother's estate. My hands were shaking. I had not noticed them start. "I set up that trust the year after you left," Richard said quietly. He was standing by the window looking out at the darkness, unable to meet my eyes. "I wanted to help you. I knew you were struggling out there. I knew you had nothing. No money, no connections, no family support. I thought I could at least give you a cushion, a foundation to build from, something to make those first years a little less brutal. What happened to it?" My voice sounded strange, distant, like it was coming from somewhere far away. "Your mother found out." He closed his eyes. "She had her lawyer forge your rejection. She intercepted every letter I sent. She made sure you never knew I was trying to reach you. She erased every trace of my attempt to help, just like she erased every trace of you from this house." I stared at the forged signature. My mother had done this. She had not just ignored me. She had not just erased me from photographs and family gatherings and holiday cards. She had actively sabotaged my life. She had stolen $2 million that was meant for me. Money that could have paid for college without debt. Money that could have given me a safety net during those terrifying first years of building my company. Money that was mine by right. "Why did you not just come find me yourself?" I asked. Why did you not show up at my door and tell me in person you had my addresses? You knew where I was living." Richard's face crumpled like paper in a fist. "Because I was a coward. Because every time I tried to stand up to Patricia, she threatened to destroy me. She has things on me, Megan. Things from before we were married. Mistakes I made when I was young and stupid and thought I was invincible. Things that would end my career. My reputation, everything I have spent my life building." He finally turned to look at me, and there were tears running down his face. "I told myself it was enough to try from a distance. I told myself you were better off away from this family, away from her poison. I told myself that sending money was the same as being there for you." He shook his head. "I was wrong. I know that now. I was wrong about everything." The room was very quiet. I could hear the distant sound of the party continuing without us, music and laughter and clinking glasses. A world of privilege that had never truly included me, even when I lived under this roof. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Why not keep it a secret? You must have known I was coming for revenge. You could have stayed silent and hoped I would destroy her without ever knowing you tried to help." Richard met my eyes. "Because when I found out the anonymous investor was you, I understood why you came back. I understood that you had spent 14 years building something powerful enough to bring this family to its knees, and I thought—" He paused, swallowed hard. "I thought you deserved to know the truth, even if it does not change anything, even if you still hate me, even if you burn this whole house down around all of us, you deserve to know that not everyone here was your enemy. I was just too weak to fight for you properly." I looked down at the documents in my hands. $2 million. 14 years, letters that never arrived, a signature that was never mine, an entire life that could have been easier, softer, less desperate, all of it stolen by my mother's pathological need to control everything, even my poverty. "She forged my signature," I said slowly. "She stole from me. Yes. She has done this before, to other people. Probably. I stopped asking questions a long time ago. It was easier that way." I set the folder down on his desk. My hands had stopped shaking. Something cold and clear was forming in my chest. Not rage exactly, something more focused than that. Something sharper. "Thank you for showing me this," I said. Richard nodded. "What are you going to do?" "What I came here to do. But you—" I looked at him carefully. "You should probably leave the ballroom. What happens next is not going to be pretty." "No." He straightened his shoulders. It was the most dignified I had ever seen him look. "I have been hiding for too long. I will face whatever happens. I deserve that much at least." Something shifted in my perception of him. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but something like respect for a man who had finally decided to stop running from his own cowardice. "Then stay," I said, "and watch." I left the study and walked back toward the ballroom. The hallway felt different now. The oil paintings of Ashford ancestors seemed to watch me with new eyes. I was not just a victim anymore. I was not just seeking revenge. I was seeking justice. There was a difference, I realized. Revenge was about pain. Justice was about truth. Victoria intercepted me before I reached the ballroom door. My stepsister had clearly been crying. Her mascara was smudged under her eyes, her perfect composure completely ruined. She stepped directly into my path, blocking my way. Her hands balled into fists at her sides. "You think you can just waltz in here and take everything?" Her voice was shrill, nearly hysterical. "This is my family, my inheritance. You were nobody. You have always been nobody." I looked at her, really looked. Victoria Ashford, 28 years old, raised in luxury, given everything she ever wanted, without having to work for any of it. She had never struggled. She had never been hungry. She had never wondered how she was going to pay rent. She had no idea what it meant to build something from nothing. And she had no idea what was about to happen. "I am the nobody who owns 51% of everything you thought was yours," I said calmly. "I am the nobody your stepmother tried to erase from existence. And in about 5 minutes, I am going to show everyone in that ballroom exactly who she really is." Victoria's face went white. "Mother is going to destroy you. She always wins. She always finds a way." "Does she?" I stepped closer until we were almost nose to nose. "Ask her how she is feeling right now. Ask her how it feels to realize that her biggest mistake just walked in through the front door wearing Valentino. I brushed past her and pushed open the ballroom door. The crowd had grown restless in my absence. Small groups huddled together, whispering, speculating about what was happening behind closed doors. My mother was by the bar, her fourth or fifth glass of champagne clutched in her white-knuckled fingers. She saw me enter, and her whole body went rigid. Charles Whitmore hurried toward me. "Miss Miller, the guests have been waiting for your remarks. If you would like to—" "Thank you, Charles." I walked to the center of the room. Every eye followed me. "I apologize for the delay. I had some family business to attend to." I looked directly at my mother. "But now I am ready. I would like to tell everyone a story about this family, about this house, about what it really means to be an Ashford." My mother set down her champagne glass so hard I heard it crack against the marble bar. Her face was pale beneath her careful makeup, her eyes wild. She began moving toward me, pushing through the crowd. "Do not you dare," she hissed. But I was already pulling out my phone. 13 minutes before I walked into this ballroom tonight, I announced my voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. My mother sent me a text message. Would anyone like to hear what it said? The crowd was frozen. Even the servers had stopped moving. 200 of Connecticut's elite held their breath, waiting. My mother lunged forward. "Megan, stop this right now." I held up my phone screen facing the crowd. It said, "Stay in the kitchen. The old money guests do not want to see a failure like you." The gasps were audible. Somewhere in the back, a champagne flute shattered against the floor, but no one looked. Every eye was fixed on me, on my phone, on my mother frozen mid-step with her hand outstretched. Her face went through a dozen expressions in the span of a heartbeat. Shock, denial, fury, fear, and finally something I had never seen on her face in all my years of knowing her: defeat. That was my welcome home tonight. I continued, my voice steady and clear. After 14 years of silence, after decades of being hidden in kitchens and erased from photographs and told I did not belong, my own mother texted me to stay out of sight because I would embarrass her in front of her rich friends. I swiped to the next image on my phone, the old photograph. Me at 11 years old, standing with my grandmother in front of the fireplace in this very room. Two people who loved each other, two people my mother had tried to make disappear. "This is who I was," I said, holding up the screen for everyone to see. "This is the girl she tried to erase from this family. And this—" I gestured to myself standing in my Valentino gown, wearing my grandmother's brooch, controlling the future of every person in this room. "This is who she failed to destroy." My mother's mask did not just crack, it shattered, completely, irreversibly, in front of the Thorntons and the Prescotts and the Vandenbergs. In front of every family she had spent 20 years trying to impress. In front of the entire world she had built on lies, an image, and the careful erasure of anything that did not fit her carefully constructed narrative. She opened her mouth to speak, to explain, to spin the story, to do what she had always done, and somehow make herself the victim. But for the first time in my life, I had the microphone. And I was not finished. My mother laughed. It was a brittle sound, sharp and desperate, cutting through the silence of the ballroom like breaking glass. She pressed her hand to her chest and turned to the crowd with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Oh, this is all just a misunderstanding," she announced, her voice pitched high with forced cheerfulness. "Megan has always been dramatic." That text was clearly a joke between mother and daughter. Some of the guests shifted uncomfortably. I could see the uncertainty on their faces. They wanted to believe her. It was easier to believe her. The alternative meant that Patricia Ashford, the woman they had known for 20 years, was a monster. My mother moved toward me, her hands outstretched in a gesture of maternal warmth that made my stomach turn. "Sweetheart, tell them," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Tell them how we always had this playful relationship. You know how I tease you. You know I did not mean anything by it." For one terrible moment I froze. The old conditioning rose up inside me like bile. The desperate child who had spent years trying to earn her mother's love. The girl who had convinced herself that maybe the cruelty was her fault. Maybe if she had been better, prettier, more worthy, her mother would have loved her. Maybe it really was just a joke. Maybe I had misunderstood everything. My hand moved to my chest without conscious thought. My fingers found the brooch pinned over my heart. My grandmother's brooch. And suddenly I remembered who I was. Not the girl in the kitchen. Not the mistake that needed to be hidden. I was Megan Miller. I had built an empire from nothing. I had survived 18 years of being told I was worthless, and I had turned that pain into power. My grandmother had never backed down from Patricia. She had never let my mother rewrite reality, and neither would I. A joke, I said, my voice steady. Let me tell you about jokes in this family. I unpinned the brooch from my dress and held it up so everyone could see it. The rubies caught the light from the chandeliers, glowing like drops of blood against the antique gold setting. This brooch belonged to my grandmother, I said. Her mother gave it to her on her wedding day, and she gave it to me the night before she died. She held my hand and said, "This is yours, Megan. Do not let your mother take it." My mother's face went white. 1 week after my grandmother's funeral, my mother threw this brooch in the trash. I heard gasps from the crowd. She told me it was cheap costume jewelry. She said it did not fit the Ashford image. She said no one would want to see me wearing something so common. I looked at my mother. She was frozen, her mouth open, her carefully constructed mask crumbling in front of everyone she had ever tried to impress. I was 11 years old. I dug this brooch out of the garbage at 3 a.m. while everyone else was sleeping. I hid it in my backpack, and I have carried it with me for 21 years. I held the brooch higher. Does that sound like a joke to you? That is not what happened, my mother said, her voice shaking. You are lying. You always lie. Am I? I tilted my head. Then let me tell you something interesting. This brooch is not cheap costume jewelry. It is antique gold with natural rubies. My grandmother had it appraised before she died. Do you know what it is worth? Silence. $40,000. The gasps were audible. Someone dropped a champagne flute. My mother staggered like she had been struck. Grandma knew what it was worth, I continued. She knew that my mother would try to take anything of value, so she gave me something she thought my mother would overlook, something she thought was safe. I pinned the brooch back over my heart. She was almost right. My mother did overlook it. She just did not look closely enough before she threw it in the trash. My mother's mouth moved, but no words came out. I reached for my phone again, swiped to the photograph. This picture was taken in 2004, right here in front of that fireplace. I pointed to the massive stone fireplace that dominated the far wall of the ballroom. It was my grandmother's birthday. I was 11 years old, and it was the only family photograph I was ever allowed to be in. I began walking toward the entrance to the main hallway, where the family photo wall was visible through the open doors. After my grandmother died, this photograph disappeared from the family wall. My mother replaced it with a landscape painting of the Connecticut coastline. My mother found her voice. That is ridiculous. I redecorated. People redecorate all the time. Do they? I stopped and turned to face her. Then explain something to me, Mother. There are 23 photographs on that wall. 23 carefully curated moments of Ashford family happiness spanning 22 years. I paused. I am not in a single one of them. The silence was absolute. I lived in this house for 8 years, 8 Christmases, 8 Thanksgivings, 8 birthdays, and my mother systematically removed every trace of my existence from the family record. I turned to the crowd. The Thorntons, the Prescotts, the Vandenbergs, all of them staring at me with a mixture of horror and fascination. When she told me to stay in the kitchen tonight, it was not a joke. It was habit. She has been hiding me my entire life, erasing me, pretending I do not exist. I held up the photograph. But she could not destroy this, because I took it with me when I left, the only proof that I was ever here, the only evidence that someone in this family loved me. My mother made a sound, something between a sob and a scream, and then she broke. You were a mistake. The words echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. Every head turned, every eye fixed on Patricia Ashford as her carefully maintained façade crumbled into dust. I was 18 when I had you, she screamed, tears streaming down her face, her mascara running in black rivers down her cheeks. 18, I had nothing. I was nobody, a waitress from Bridgeport who could barely afford rent. And then I met Richard and I had a chance, a real chance to be somebody, to be something more than poor white trash from the wrong side of town. She was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. But you were always there. Every time someone looked at you, they saw me, the real me, the poor girl who did not belong. I could not let them see that. I could not let them know where I came from. I had to— Mother, stop! Victoria rushed forward, grabbing Patricia's arm. Please stop talking. But Patricia was beyond stopping. The dam had broken and 20 years of secrets were pouring out. "I did what I had to do to survive," she wailed. "To give us a better life. You think I enjoyed it? You think I wanted to hide my own daughter? I had no choice. I had to become someone else. I had to erase everything that reminded people of who I used to be." She looked at me with eyes that were wild and desperate, and somehow impossibly seeking understanding. "I erased you because I was trying to erase myself." The ballroom was silent. 200 people stood frozen watching Patricia Ashford, the perfect hostess, the elegant wife, the woman who had spent 2 decades pretending to be old money, fall apart in front of them. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I did not see a monster. I saw a frightened girl from Bridgeport who had been so ashamed of herself that she had sacrificed her own daughter to escape her past. I saw someone who had been so desperate to belong that she had destroyed the only person who had ever truly needed her. It did not excuse what she had done. Nothing could excuse that. But it explained it, and somehow that was almost worse. "I know," I said quietly, "and that is the saddest part." A movement at the edge of the crowd caught my attention. Richard was walking forward. The guests parted for him as he made his way to the center of the room. His face was pale but determined. He looked like a man who had finally decided to stop running. "Richard," my mother's voice was desperate pleading, "tell them this is all lies. Tell them, I cannot." The 2 words fell like stones into still water. Richard turned to face the crowd. "Everything Megan has said tonight is true. I have known for years, and I did nothing to stop it." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. "This is a trust fund I established for Megan in 2012. $2 million meant to help her build a life after she left this house." He unfolded the paper. "My wife discovered it. She had her lawyer forge Megan's signature to reject the funds. She intercepted every letter I tried to send." He handed the document to Charles Whitmore. "I would like this entered into the company records, as evidence of what happened, as evidence of who we really are." "Richard," my mother's voice was barely a whisper. "What are you doing?" Richard turned to look at her, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw something like strength in his eyes. "The right thing," he said, "for once in my miserable life." He walked to where I was standing and faced me directly. "I am not asking for forgiveness," he said. "I do not deserve it. I watched you suffer and I told myself that sending money was enough, that trying from a distance was enough. I was a coward. I was afraid of your mother, afraid of losing everything I had built, and I let that fear keep me silent while you paid the price." His voice cracked. "But I want you to know that I am done hiding. Whatever you decide to do with this company, with this family, I will support it. And I will spend whatever time I have left trying to be the person I should have been 20 years ago." I stared at him. This man who had been a ghost in my childhood, who had looked the other way while my mother erased me piece by piece, who had tried in his weak and cowardly way to help me from a distance. He was not a good man, but maybe he was not entirely a bad one either. "Why now?" I asked. "Why not 10 years ago? Why not when it would have mattered?" "Because 10 years ago I still thought I could have both. My comfortable life and a clear conscience." He shook his head. "Tonight you showed me that was never possible, that eventually you have to choose. And I choose to try to be better." I thought about my grandmother, about the brooch over my heart, about second chances and the possibility of healing. "I am not ready to forgive you," I said. "I may never be ready. I understand. But," I paused, "someday, maybe, we can talk." Something shifted in his face, not hope exactly, something more fragile than that. "Someday is more than I deserve." I turned away and looked around the ballroom. The party had transformed. Small clusters of guests were whispering to each other, already processing what they had witnessed, already rewriting history in their heads. The Thorntons were gathering their coats. The Prescotts were making their way toward the exit. Mrs. Vandenberg caught my eye and nodded once, a gesture that might have been respect, or might have been acknowledgement, or might have been nothing at all. My mother was sitting on a chair someone had brought her. Victoria stood beside her, but even my stepsister seemed to want to be somewhere else. The woman who had spent 20 years building her perfect image was now surrounded by the ruins of everything she had created. I had dreamed of this moment for 14 years. I had imagined the triumph, the satisfaction, the feeling of finally being vindicated. But standing there watching my mother weep while her world collapsed around her, I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired. I felt empty. I felt like someone standing in the ashes of a house fire, grateful that the flames were out, but knowing that everything had been burned beyond repair. "What happens now?" Richard asked quietly. "I do not know," I said honestly. "I came here for revenge. I got it. And now?" I shook my head. "Now I have to figure out who I am when I am not the girl in the kitchen anymore. And the company," I looked at him. "The company will be fine. I did not buy it to destroy it. I bought it to prove that I could." He nodded slowly. "And your mother?" I glanced at Patricia, still weeping, still broken. "My mother will have to live with who she is. That is punishment enough." I walked toward the main entrance, not the service entrance, not the kitchen door, the front door, the one I had never been allowed to use when I lived here. "Megan," my mother's voice stopped me. I turned. She had risen from her chair. Her dress was disheveled, her makeup destroyed her carefully constructed elegance in shambles. She looked small, old, human. "I did love you," she said, her voice barely audible. "In my own way, I just did not know how." I looked at her for a long moment. "Maybe," I said, "but love that hides you in kitchens and erases you from photographs and throws your grandmother's brooch in the trash." I shook my head. "That is not love, Mother. That is shame wearing love's mask." She flinched like I had slapped her. "Will I ever see you again?" I considered the question. The woman who had spent my entire childhood pretending I did not exist was now asking if I would choose to see her. "I do not know," I said finally. "That depends on whether you can learn to see me. Really see me. Not as your mistake. Not as your past. Not as the thing you needed to hide." I met her eyes. "Just as your daughter." I did not wait for her response. I walked through the front door of the Ashford estate and stepped out into the cold December night. My Bentley was waiting in the circular driveway. I had arranged for it to be brought around while I was inside. The valet, a young man who had probably heard everything that happened, handed me the keys without meeting my eyes. "Thank you," I said. "You are welcome, Miss Miller." I stood there for a moment looking back at the house. 12,000 square feet of old money and older secrets. The place where I had learned that I did not belong. The place where I had been hidden and erased and told I was nothing. The place I had conquered. I got into my car and started the engine. The leather seats were warm. The dashboard glowed softly in the darkness. Everything about this car whispered success, wealth, achievement. Everything I had built from the ashes of my childhood. I pulled out of the driveway and watched the Ashford estate shrink in my rearview mirror. I had spent so long dreaming of this night, planning every detail, imagining the look on my mother's face when she realized what I had become, when she understood that the daughter she had thrown away was now more powerful than she could ever imagine. But now that it was over, I understood something I had not understood before. Revenge was never going to make me whole. It was never going to fill the void that my mother had carved into my heart. It was never going to give me back the childhood I had lost, or the love I had never received. All it could do was make me done. And maybe done was enough. Maybe done was the first step toward something better, toward forgiving myself for all the years I had spent believing I was worthless, toward building a life that was not defined by what had been taken from me. My mother had spent 22 years teaching me that I did not belong. She was right about one thing. I did not belong in her kitchen. I did not belong in her version of this family. I did not belong in the small shameful box she had tried to keep me in. I belonged wherever I chose to be. And tonight, I chose to leave. The road stretched out ahead of me, dark and empty and full of possibility. I did not know where I was going. I did not know what came next. But for the first time in my life, that felt like freedom.